It was a cold, moonless night when Emily moved into the old house at the edge of town. The locals had warned her. They spoke of strange happenings, whispers in the night, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. But Emily was determined to start over. She needed peace, and the house, with its creaky floors and dusty windows, seemed like the perfect retreat. The first few nights were uneventful. Emily unpacked her belongings, cleaned up the place, and settled into her new life.
But there was something off about the house.
It wasn't the drafts or the eerie silence. It was the way the house felt alive. Every room seemed to have its own heartbeat, its own presence. Every time she turned a corner, she could swear she saw something out of the corner of her eye, a shadow, a flicker, a figure. But when she looked directly, it was always gone. One evening, as Emily sat in the living room, reading a book by the fireplace, she heard something. It was faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind. But as she strained her ears, it became clearer. The sound was coming from upstairs, from the attic. Curious but unnerved, Emily grabbed a flashlight and made her way up the stairs. The hallway was dark, the air thick with dust. She hesitated at the attic door, her hand trembling on the knob. The whispers grew louder, almost pleading now. With a deep breath, she turned the handle and stepped inside. The attic was cold, much colder than the rest of the house. Dust hung in the air like a fog, and the wooden beams creaked under her weight. Emily's flashlight swept across the room. It landed on old, forgotten furniture draped in sheets. But it wasn't the furniture that caught her attention. It was the mirror, an antique, full-length mirror leaning against the wall in the far corner. Emily felt drawn to it. She moved closer, her breath catching in her throat. As she gazed into the glass, she saw something move behind her. Her heart raced. She spun around, but the attic was empty. Confused, she turned back to the mirror. This time, something was different. The reflection staring back at her wasn't her own. It was a woman, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. Emily stumbled backward, her mind racing. What was happening? The whispering returned, louder now, as if the voice was inside her head. Leave now, or she'll take you. Emily's pulse pounded in her ears. She backed away from the mirror, but as she turned to leave the attic, the door slammed shut. The room seemed to close in around her. The whispers turned into shrieks, and the mirror began to vibrate violently. Desperate, Emily searched for a way out, but the attic was no longer the same. The walls seemed to stretch and twist, and the air was thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. The reflection in the mirror now showed her, trapped in the attic, her face twisted in terror. In a moment of panic, Emily reached for the door again. This time it opened. She ran down the stairs, her heart racing, her breath shallow. But as she reached the bottom, she stopped dead in her tracks. The front door was wide open, but something blocked her path. A shadowy figure stood at the door, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. It was the woman from the mirror, her face contorted in a horrific grin. "You can't leave," the figure whispered, her voice like ice. "Not until you've seen her." Suddenly, the house seemed to shift around Emily. The walls closed in, the floor beneath her feet groaned in agony. She turned and ran, not knowing where she was going, only knowing that she had to get away from that thing. But as she reached the stairs again, something cold wrapped around her ankle. She screamed and fell, crashing to the ground. Her flashlight rolled across the floor, casting long shadows across the walls. The figure loomed over her, its breath cold on her skin. With one final scream, Emily was pulled into the darkness. The walls swallowed her whole, and the room fell silent once again. The next morning, the house was still. The front door stood wide open, the wind gently swaying the curtains. But there was no sign of Emily. The neighbors whispered, but no one dared go near the house. The attic remained untouched, except for one thing, the mirror. It was as if it had never been disturbed. But if anyone dared to look into it, they would see not the house, not the room, but Emily's face. Her eyes wide in terror, her lips frozen in a scream, trapped in the reflection forever. The house, they say, still waits. Every night, it whispers, calling to those who dare to listen. And the mirror in the corner of the attic is always watching, waiting for its next victim. No one knows what truly happened to Emily that night, but the house is still there, standing as it always has, silent and waiting. And sometimes, when the wind is right, you can hear the faintest whisper coming from inside, a warning, a plea. Leave now, or she will take you.